So you love fiction and you love philosophy, but how can you integrate the two together so it doesn't feel like you are forcing it onto your reader? And today I'm going to lay out a 7-step system so that you can integrate your favorite philosophers and your favorite philosophies into your own writing. And if you guys don't already know, my name is Ian, and on this channel we cover everything related to the greatest books and the greatest authors of all time. And even more importantly, I also give practical tips to people like you so that one day you can join the ranks of legendary writers who, for instance, integrated certain philosophies into their own work. And when I think about this quest to integrate two things that are so axiomatically different at a prose level, because when we look at philosophy, it feels like I have to hunker down and follow it step by step if I'm reading someone like Deleuze or Spinoza. It's not necessarily an easy time, but the exact opposite of that is good fiction. When I'm reading and locked into Toni Morrison or Cormac McCarthy, it feels like I'm on the jet stream. And so step number 1 is that you need to become very comfortable with the philosophy you want to integrate. And this goes beyond just reading it. You need to know every in and out of it, because as you are writing this lengthy piece of fiction, if you are writing a novel, there will be countless opportunities where you can integrate it into. And the more data you have, the better. And an author who has integrated philosophy into their fiction in a beautiful way is David Foster Wallace. And he's going to hop in here right now and give us some tips on how to integrate philosophy into your fiction in a more seamless way. And this quote is from an interview, and we're going to start with the interviewer. And he asked David, quote, "I was interested in the way you made philosophy an element of your first novel, Broom of the System. And I wondered if you had to make a decision at any point whether you were going to write about philosophy the way philosophers do, and maybe if you then saw fiction as a way, culturally, to bracket concepts like philosophy, God, America, and so on." And Wallace responds by saying, "I don't know about you guys, but I didn't start writing fiction until I was 21. And at the beginning, we all have to write our requisite amounts of shit. And my shit was basically disguised essays. They were like really bad Ayn Rand or something. I was a math and philosophy major at college. I wasn't a writer. So a lot of it had to do with the fact that the Broom of the System, the first draft of that, was one of my honors theses as an undergraduate. The other one was a really hardcore math and semantics thing that used a lot of Wittgenstein. And the two kept bleeding into each other. For instance, the math thesis was written in conversational voice, which you're not supposed to do, so the two went back and forth. The other thing is that my father is a professional philosopher. He was a student of Wittgenstein's last student, Norman Malcolm, who wrote his biography. A lot of the Broom of the System is weirdly autobiographical in ways that no one else knows. Like the title comes from my mother's pet name for roughage. She calls roughage and fiber the Broom of the System. I think there's a throwaway reference to that in the book. And so there's a lot to unpack there. But the first thing I want to talk about is that if you stop at this point, if you just read it and you don't follow along with the next 6 steps, you're going to release some Ayn Rand type shit on us. And that's what we don't want. We don't want to feel like you just kind of mirrored your objectivist philosophy in a 70-page rant by John Galt for us to consume. Even though that can be great at times, you are better than that. This is not the 1940s or 50s anymore. You are not some weird alt-left or alt-right person who can just release some shitty Kindle fiction book that's got a bunch of veiled political stuff or philosophical stuff in there and feel good about yourself. I believe in you more than that. And Wallace admits at the start of his career, when he was a young and beginning writer, that in the first draft, it wasn't very seamless, that it was really rough, and it did feel kind of like Ayn Rand. And this is something I find early writers often run into, is that they focus way too much on integrating philosophies and these complicated things in the work, which aren't what makes stories great. If you somehow embed Spinoza or Heidegger into a work of fiction, then that doesn't make it any better. It does make it better if you do it without us knowing really about it, and then later on we're like, damn, that was really crazy, and you have guys like me breaking it down on my channel. But just doing it is not enough. That leads us to step number 2 of this system, which is you have to integrate it into your life. This is one of the main messages of Right Conscious, that these modalities of thoughts, Spinozism, if that's a real thing, Jungianism, whatever, postmodernism, that just knowing and reading about it isn't enough. You have to integrate it almost like a religion into your life. And this can take anywhere from 6 months to 2 years, depending on how dedicated you are to that. And by integrating it into your life, you're able to see the world through that lens. And that's what your characters are doing. That's what you're forcing the reader to do. And so if you're trying to make these characters, these settings, these whatever that are integrated with these philosophies authentic, you have to first do it yourself, and it has to be deep. And then even better than that, once you've integrated it, you have to start self-analyzing yourself and kind of getting all into wacky self-consciousness land and being like, okay, what are the strengths and weaknesses of this? Tonight, I'm going to, talk to my wife in more of a Kantian ethics, or, and then the next night I'm going to do a Aristotelian ethical argument with her. That one will probably get you thrown in the doghouse, let me just say. You shouldn't be embodying the Nietzsche, the Hemingway, or the Aristotle when you are arguing with especially another woman if you are a man. It's much better to embed the Zizek'in kind of modality when you're, arguing, because you can be, yeah, you're right, babe. You hear those jets up there, everybody? The sound of freedom. And that's a great segue to the greatest very good example of integrating philosophy into your life and moving it to fiction. And I'm out here right now in the desert where the Glanton and Blood Meridian rode through. And in Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian, he integrates Nietzsche, Gnosticism, Hermeticism, tarot, astrology, Christianity, and many other things I don't remember right now into that novel. And he lived those things. And it was also a reflection of his life, because in 1974, Cormac McCarthy moved to Tucson and left his second wife, left Tennessee where he was born and had all his ties to, and came out here and really started living for the first time. And it's no surprise that Blood Meridian really encapsulates a lot of those elements and really kind of shows this Nietzschean point of view about reality, which McCarthy himself in his own personal life was living. And if you go, for instance, to the Cormac McCarthy archive, you could see that that's what he was reading around that time, or very similar authors to Nietzsche. And so we're not even writing yet, everybody. And so you have to for sure transcend the point of just being like, wow, I really like this guy. This guy's got some cool ideas. You need to read their whole bibliography and then integrate it into your life for 2 years before you ever dare to put it into your novel. Because we want this to be good. You know, this is a process. You could spend this time, if you don't want to do this, just writing your novel. That's fine. But when we look at the people who have done it successfully, they spent 7 to 10 years writing their novel. And I know that may be hard to hear. I know you think you're the one, but you're probably not the one. When you look at the IQ and the talent and the tenacity of a lot of these authors that have accomplished this and how long it took them, and they weren't working a job, they were doing it full time, then you're like, wait, this probably won't be as easy for me. And this is something I love. Like, people publish these books and they're like, why isn't anyone reading it? Why isn't it getting published? And it's like, oh wait, you spent less time, you were less talented, and you honestly put way less effort in than other authors. And you somehow expected to get the golden ticket. Step number 3 is, and we could call this 3 and 4, we'll integrate these two together, is write your first draft as you normally would. Don't worry about philosophy at all. And I hope, because you are a reader and you are conscious, that you maybe already have some of these modalities of thought, integrated within you. A lot of us have Christianity, even if you're not a Christian now, embedded in us from an early age, or just other things. So you maybe already have some of these ready, but even if you know, like, hey, I kind of want to integrate some Freudianism into this novel, don't worry about that yet. Your first draft needs to just be normal. Just write it as is. Use your imagination, and that is steps 3 and 4, is your imagination is the best voice. Even though you want to say somewhat accurate to this point of view, you can't hold on to it. That's not what really matters. What matters is engaging with the reader and making them feel like they want to read more. It's not just about entertainment. You want to glue them to the page and make them want to work. If you have a hard piece of fiction, you want them to say, like, all right, I know this is going to be hard. It's going to take a lot of brain power after working 50 hours a week and the kids are running around, but I am dedicated to this. I really care and am invested in this. That's the type of response that you want from someone. And so the way to get there is to let the magic flow, let your unconscious and the intuition and the non-logical side, because philosophy is very left-brained. It is so objective and logical, and it feels that way. And that's not what, in the first draft, that's not what we want. We have a lot of time for that in the future. So write your novel as is. Don't worry about things being right. And if you're feeling things coming out, if you're feeling these philosophical ideas pouring out of you, don't correct them. Don't guide them. Let them flow. If they don't make sense now, we can fix that later, if at all. Okay, so now you have this first draft of your novel, and step number 5 is to revise as you normally would, because once again, when we study great authors, Blood Meridian, Infinite Jest, other Gravity's Rainbow, these novels didn't get finished in 3 years. Most of the time, there were anywhere from 7 to 12 years of revision involved in those novels, and each draft, yes, draft would take a year or two to finish. So this isn't the 90-day novel or the 90-day revision. This is the 2-year revision for one draft. And so let's say, and you can always speed this up, do whatever you want. I'm chill with whatever you want, but I'm here advocating for great writing. I'm here trying to be a voice of motivation for people who are trying to become legendary writers. We already have enough normal writing. We don't need any more of that. There's a lifetime of normalcy in terms of what I can read. So I want you to, for the first and second, even maybe third draft, do that without worrying about the philosophical system and what you're trying to accomplish with that. That's still not important yet. And when you look at most authors and how they draft, I've been to the Cormac McCarthy archive, the David Foster Wallace archive. I've seen a lot of Ernest Hemingway, early drafts. They weren't worrying about the fine details and making sure everything was correct and timelines and all these things were correct in those. They were still trying to give it life. Eventually, you're going to kill its soul. Eventually, as you're giving it to an editor and getting into the later stages, you're going to start sapping life from it. So you want it to be as bright and as alive or as dark as possible at this point, so then you can make cuts later.
Sorry for the audio shift, everyone. It's the next day, and I can't film outside anymore because it's 4 in the morning and it's dark. And so let us move on to step number 5, which is where you start to integrate your philosophical ideas and elements into the story. And one of the easiest ways to do this is obviously through characters. When we look at Judge Holden in Blood Meridian, and if you've never read it, Judge Holden is this insane individual that believes war is God. And he's personifying a lot of Nietzsche's ideals, especially Nietzsche's idea of passive nihilism. And when you look at Cormac McCarthy's early drafts of Holden, he didn't have that much depth and personality. And so there's kind of 2 different things that you can do. First off, you can add action. You can make your character do things that kind of reflect these ideals. For instance, Judge Holden is a pedophile and rapes people and kills dogs and drags an idiot around with him. So that kind of really personifies this idea of the will to power, or, you know, the obliteration of ethics without even having to tell us. But that's necessarily not enough, especially if it's something a little bit more esoteric than Nietzsche. Like, let's say you are trying to explore this idea of Aquinian. I don't know if that's how you talk about Aquinas. Is it Aquinian? But let's say you're trying to talk about the servant of theology philosophy, especially, you know, really trying to show one of that philosophy's elements, divine revelation. Well, there's 2 different aspects to divine revelation. There's obviously receiving it. So that could be one of these action scenes, but what does that feel like? What does it feel like to receive a divine revelation? And that could be an important scene, and that honestly sounds really fun to write. But what if you don't have that much interiority with your characters? I know a lot of people, including myself, sometimes in whatever short story or novel I'm writing, I'm not really going into the character's emotions or their mind very much, and other times I am. But if you're not, and there's this divine revelation, how do you show it? Well, the easiest way to do that is not through action, but through speaking about it, by telling, and by the character giving these disquisitions or these speeches. And as I mentioned earlier, you know, one of the most exalted moments of this is the John Galt speech in Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged, where he just goes on this rant for 60+ pages. And he tells us everything that he believes and what Ayn Rand believes. But that's at the utmost extreme. And there are these moments, like, for instance, I think of Franz Kafka's The Trial or Albert Camus' The Stranger. And there's literally a trial going on. That's kind of one of these classic tropes where a character can give this speech. Because how do you set up this moment where this character can really tell us about what they believe at length. And so a trial is one of them. In Blood Meridian, McCarthy uses a great strategy of the judge giving a fireside talk. They're by the fire and he's giving a talk. You could set this up between a dialogue between two people. This is probably one of the most common ways that you can do it. You put your character maybe with a polarizing figure of whatever regard, someone that can help pull out a certain topic from them, and maybe they talk about it in a lighthearted way, and it's not this epic disquisition or like a monologue. But if you sprinkle 4 to 8 of those in the novel, we can actually start to get a picture alongside some of the action-oriented stuff and the setting and the kind of mood of the novel, what some of the philosophical implications that you were trying to push. Another way you can do it, if we just want to talk about an American classic, like in Slaughterhouse-Five, is through humor, through kind of black humor, or just like pointing things out through irony and whatnot. And that could also be almost through like a negative. Through the negative, you can actually build your philosophy also by showing what is not true or what is not correct. We can kind of learn in reverse a character's or a book's philosophy. All right, so you start to do this and it starts to work its way in. And so now you have your finished book. But if you have this vision, especially if it's a complicated one, like when I look at David Foster Wallace's The Broom of the System and his combination with Wittgenstein and all of that, like it is very delicate and it is synergizing with a very complicated philosopher. And so when you send it off, and this is the hard part because you're maybe not in control of this, but you should most likely be working with an editor that knows what the hell you are talking about. And I know with traditional publishing houses, you don't get to pick your editor, but at some level, you do have a little bit of control with that. And if you don't, you're really going to need to enlighten them through emails, through phone calls, FaceTimes, whatever, about this philosophy if they don't want to read it. I mean, I would just straight up ask like, hey, you should just read an introductory book or just read whatever you can on this guy because this is really important to my novel. And get that out of the way at the start because you don't want to be playing catch up the entire time. Like, no, I need this. They're going to correct a bunch of stuff and be like, why is this in here? And you're like, no, this is systematically in here trying to produce a theme. If you're self-publishing, you don't need to worry about this. And if you're hiring an editor, obviously you can pick an editor who knows this. But most editors are open to this because they want to be able to work with you and they are readers at heart. And so if you're asking them to maybe read a book to be able to understand what you're talking about at a basic level so that you can work together, I'm sure that's not the most unreasonable request of all time. And if they are a good enough editor, they probably should already know what you're talking about unless it's super esoteric. But this is why thinking things out at length is very important because you're going to have to explain all of this because, like I said, some of these elements may seem trivial, but you're going to have to talk about your reasoning because they're going to want to cut this. And so now you have released your novel. Now it's been published. But the question is, are you going to talk about, are you going to reveal that it was really a Baudrillardian critique of social media through this character? Or whatever other theory that you're doing, or are you going to stay silent? And my recommendation here on Right Conscious is that you stay silent. Don't make it about you. Let us explore. Let us try and figure it out. Maybe you could tell us some other elements of what's going on, but don't talk about these things because it's a treasure hunt. We want to be able to learn and to feel and to see what your mind is doing, and that makes us become more rabid fans of you. That's why, guys, a lot of the authors behind me don't talk about their works. Never mention who influenced them or what they were doing. Because I personally feel turned off when I hear an author go too deep into their novel or at least shoot ideas down. Like, okay, if you're going to explain it to me, tell me what's happening. That's okay. Like, give me the full breakdown of what you meant and what is happening. But a lot of authors give these like kind of half-ass truths. God, I'm messing the words up right now. When people ask them about stuff, because someone will be at a Q&A and they'll present this theory and then the author will be like, no, that's wrong. I actually meant this, but they don't give enough information. So it's like they've kind of just ruined the entire thing. Don't be that person. Either give me nothing or give me everything. Okay, so if you were writing a philosophical novel right now, who are you including? What philosopher, what idea are you integrating into your novel? Don't worry, no one's going to steal your idea. Post that down in the comments below, and I am super excited to see what you guys are working on.